The first story of the 16th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. The Ribos Operation is the 98th story overall, it's 4 parts long, and is written by Robert Holmes. So, the Ribos Operation is actually the first story that kicks off the Key to Time storyline, Doctor Who's first ever season long storyline, in which the Doctor is given the task to find the key to time, which is split into 6 different elements, and the Doctor has to travel across the time and space to try and get the 6 elements. And of course, all 6 elements are actually disguised in order to make sure they're all properly well hidden. So the plot of the Ribos Operation is as follows. The Doctor is summoned by the mysterious and powerful White Guardian and sent on a quest to find the 6 segments of the key to time, which once assembled will restore balance to the universe. Joining the Doctor and K9 is the smart and sassy Romana, a Time Lord fresh from the Academy. Landing on the wintry planet of Ribos to locate the first segment, the TARDIS crew quickly find themselves embroiled in a little local trouble with a pair of conmen and an unstable warlord. So that is the plot of Ribos Operation. Ribos Operation is a very good story to say the least. Not one of Robert Holmes' best ever scripts, but I definitely think they definitely put in the effort to make the story enjoyable to say the least. I think the production of the story is very good to say. It's very good. I like the White Guardian's little realm or planet or home or however you like to call it. It does give it that holy warm feel to it, and you can tell by the lack of music while the Doctor's talking to the White Guardian, and obviously the music when the TARDIS lands in the White Guardian's realm. If I like the organ music. It definitely made that feel more holy and more a little mysterious. And like the set of Rebels as well, very well done. I like the whole wintry communist Russia feel to it, and also like the castle grounds, and the catacombs, which most of the story's climax took place. The outfits looked very good. We're both seen in a very good way, and I think Romana's outfit actually pretty much stole the show, even though she wasn't properly prepared. But her outfit actually somehow suited Rebos. The script was very well good, and the direction by George Spenton Foster was very good as well. And I think out of the two or so stories he directed, I think this one was actually slightly better. The plot was very good, as I mentioned before. This is the first story of the Key to Time storyline, which runs throughout the whole season, and I think it's a very good start to the storyline. And it's a good idea to have a season one long season storyline. It's a nice little change as opposed to like the Monster of the Week storylines or Planet of the Week or so the Doctor Who has had for the past few years. Yes, and the first segment was actually disguised as a piece of Jethric, a component needed for some warp drive engines, and it was said to be very powerful and is very rare. So I think that part of the plot was a very good inclusion. And in terms of memorable moments, there were quite a fair few. The bit in the beginning where the Doctor was summoned to meet the White Guardian definitely deserves a mention, and the organ music playing to gave that scene some gravitas. I also like the part where the Doctor met Romana for the first time, and then Romana obviously introduced herself as Romana Dreadvolunda, and the Doctor insisted on calling her Romana, which she didn't like, and then the Doctor was like, it's either Romana or Fred, and then Romana actually chose Fred, but then the Doctor insisted on calling her Romana. I did like how the Doctor was able to defeat the Gruff Vindicator by disguising himself as a soldier, and in part 4, and he switched to Jethric with the explosive he had, and obviously the Gruff Vindicator actually ended up getting blown up and died. That was very darkly funny, and that was a pretty good element to that story as well. Well, to the acting, which I thought was very good. Tom Baker was great in this story. I think his comedic side was in full display here and didn't feel forced in comparison to later stories in this season. And he does have some great moments like meeting the White Guardian and Romani, and obviously both of those moments are rather funny and they show the sort of character the Fourth Doctor is. I did find it funny when the White Guardian told the Doctor that he'll be assisted on his key to quest the key to time, but the Doctor insisted not. He didn't want to have an assistant, and that pretty much did reflect what happened after season 14 when after Elizabeth Sladen left, and after the popularity of the Deadly Assassin, Tom Baker thought it would be a good idea for the Doctor to be traveling alone, but obviously the powers that be pretty much shot that idea down and just gave him Leela. So yeah, so a bit of real life elements is actually creeping into the scripts here, which is actually quite good. Mary Tam plays the new companion, Romana Dreadvolunda, or Romana for short. Romana is a Time Lord who's recently graduated from the Academy, and she's assigned to help the Doctor the Key to Time. I think Mary Tam actually did a very good job playing this incarnation of Romana, and it's a shame we only get to see her for this season only, as Lala Ward actually takes over in the following season. I liked Romana's introduction, and she's shown to be slightly cleverer than the Doctor, or at least just as clever as the Doctor in this least, and she does tease him over it. I do like how she does. I do like how she does allow the Doctor to like do more of the challenging scenarios because he is more experienced in in those areas. But obviously, when it comes to like repairing something or doing like any complicated stuff, you know how obviously the Fourth Doctor is a bit stubborn and he doesn't really allow anyone to do anything else. But then obviously you have Romana out doctoring the Doctor. So this story was actually a very good debut for Romana. She does a good job. She doesn't do as much, but I think it's still a good debut for Romana, to say the least. The second K9 makes his proper debut in the story, as you've seen in the box at the end of the Invasion of Time in the last season. He's basically the same as the first K9, no differences. I mean, he's still voiced by John Leeson. He doesn't do much other than shooting down the Gruff in the K's guards in part 3. But I did like how the relationship between K9 and Romana is actually starting to build, just like the relationship the first K9 had with Leela. Yeah, so that was a pretty good element to have. So onto the side cast, they're all very good. We had first off we had Garen. He is a con artist slash thief, and he comes from Hackney Wick in East London. He was aided by his assistant on staff, and promised him that their Ribos operation would be their last mission. And what Garen was trying to do, he was trying to sell Ribos to the Graf Vindicate, so the Graf Vindicate can use Ribos for his own, for like a training ground for his troops. But then obviously as soon as the Graf found out that he's been conned, he tries to kill the Doctor and the Doctor, Romana, and Garen. So I'll get on to the Graf a bit later. So more on Garen. So as I said, he was a con artist as well, and I think he was a very good character, and he was a very good character along with on stuff his assistant. And I did like at the end how Garen was trying to steal the Jethric from the Doctor, but then the Doctor actually swapped it with a piece of, well, he was trying to steal the Doctor's Jethric but with a piece of rock, but the Doctor noticed and replaced the Jethric with the rock. So that was a pretty funny scene. Onstoff, Garen's assistant, he is just as cunning as Garen, but Onstoff is more sympathetic, judging by his conversation with Binro. I did like there was a scene I liked with Garen. Sorry, yeah, not with Garen. I mean, with Binro and Onstoff. How Onstoff was telling Binro how after the plan succeeded, Onstoff wants to go back to Hackney Wick. He does, but obviously Onstoff doesn't know what it is. But then he's like, but he assumes that Hackney Wick is his home. So he was my favorite side character in this story. Binro, he was an outcast that lived outside Rebus, and he was a heretic as well, as he found out the reasons why the seasons were changing because of Rebus' distance to the sun, but his findings actually clashed with the beliefs of Rebus, because they believed that the change in season was due to a war between a sun god and the ice god or something like that. And obviously during his conversation with Onstoff pretty much confirms his findings, and obviously Binro was very pleased about it. You can see the smile on his face afterwards. And unfortunately not Onstoff, Binro actually dies at the hands of the Graf because he was shot in the catacombs, and that really upset Onstoff. We had Sholak. He was the aide to the Graf Vindicate, and he was very loyal, but he was killed by a rockfall after the Shrews. The armed forces of Rebus fired a cannonball into the catacombs. And finally we have the Seeker, a clairvoyant that worked with the Graf Vindicate to try and find Onstoff. She prophesied that everyone would die, including herself, and all but one, but then her prophecy actually came to pass. And the one that actually didn't die was the Doctor, obviously. So I think out of all these characters, I kind of like, as I said before, I think Onstoff I actually like out of all of them, simply because he does have a bit more compassion than Garen, despite assisting Garen in some of these scams. But I do think he actually does take the same pleasure as Garen when these schemes succeed, and he didn't really have much of a reaction when the Doctor was able to see through Garen's scheme to switch the Gathric with the Rock, but then obviously the Doctor switched it back, and I don't think he really had much notice to it. But I think he didn't really care because they were able to get away with some of the graph's treasure at the end. So yeah, I think he was pretty much happy about that, to say the least. So on to the enemy of our story, we have the Graf Vindicay. He's a tyrant that came to Rebos and wanted to buy Rebos from Garen, as he actually wanted to use Rebos as a training ground for his army so he can return to his home planet and take the throne from his half brother. He realized that he'd been conned and wanted Garen dead, who was with the Dr. Romana at the time, to recover the Jetheric. I think he was a very good villain. He was said to be rather psychotic, but I think he was more pantomimey. He was a very hammy villain than he was psychotic, but I think this was done for laughs, but I must admit I think his actor John C did a great job playing him though. I must admit that. I don't think he ever returned to Doctor Who, but it'd been nice to see him again. So on to the faults of this story. I mean, there aren't a whole lot, but they're still there. For instance, the pacing was, it was good for the most part, but it dragged in some places, especially in the. So I think after the beginning, it did kind of drag a bit, and then did think the cliffhangers were a bit weak. Okay, and they weren't very big as well. And part one, we had the Doctor Roman in the presence of a beast called the Shrivenzal, and I think they were trying to slide under the door, and they ended up getting trapped there or something like that. And part two had the Graf ordered the executions of the Doctor, Romana, and Garen, and part three had the Graf notice the Doctor and crew's presence after the Doctor accidentally knocked off a skull in the catacombs. But these faults don't really take away from most of the story, for the most part. But I do have a bit of a nitpick. I mean, how the hell was K9 able to get down the steps of the catacombs when the Doctor mentioned that the steps were treacherous and there were barely any steps as well? I mean, unless K9 somehow has an ability to fly, which we actually does, but we never actually see in the classics. But how? Unless, maybe the steps weren't that as steep as they usually are. Maybe Kane was able to get down to them, but I did not see any steps whatsoever. Maybe it was a mistake in the script. I really don't know. But I must say, to conclude the story, to conclude this review, I think the Ribos Operation is a very light-hearted story that has some strong strands of very good ideas. Of course, this is Robert Holmes we're talking about. Despite a few flaws, but I do think that the Ribos Operation actually introduces the key to time storyline very well, so I have to give the Ribos Operation an 8 out of 10. My next review will be the second story of the Key to Time, The Pirate Planet, which sees the Doctor Who writing debut of Douglas Adams. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of the Ribos Operation, and please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and feel free to join my Discord server if you want to. The link is in the description box. Until then, see you later.